Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness is the one that changes the fate of kingdoms. Emily Carter had never believed in fairy tales, especially not the kind whispered around old campfires where wolves ruled hidden empires beneath the mountains and kings walked beneath silver moons. To her, the forests of northern Montana were simply home, stretching across endless pine-covered ridges where every trail, creek, and towering cedar felt as familiar as the lines on her own hands. At 26, she spent her days as a wildlife ranger, checking remote paths, rescuing injured animals, and making sure hikers respected the fragile balance of nature. Most evenings ended the same way, with muddy boots resting beside the front porch of her small log cabin, a mug of hot tea warming her hands, and the peaceful silence of the wilderness settling around her like an old friend. That afternoon had started no differently. Gray clouds drifted slowly across the autumn sky while a cool breeze carried the scent of pine needles and distant rain through the valley. Emily was finishing one last trail inspection before sunset when an unfamiliar sound reached her ears. It wasn't the sharp cry of an eagle or the nervous rustle of a frightened deer. It was softer, almost hidden beneath the wind. A tiny whimper. She stopped immediately, listening. The sound came again, weak and trembling. Following it through thick brush and fallen branches, she eventually reached a narrow clearing where golden leaves covered the ground like a blanket. There, curled beside the roots of an ancient oak, lay the smallest wolf pup she had ever seen. His silver-gray fur was soaked from the chilly drizzle, one tiny paw trapped beneath a broken tree branch. Bright blue eyes stared up at her with equal parts fear and hope. Emily slowly knelt several feet away, careful not to frighten him. "Hey there," she whispered with the gentle voice she always used around frightened animals. "You're okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The little wolf didn't growl. He didn't run. Instead, he continued watching her with an unusual calmness, almost as though he understood every word. Emily carefully lifted the fallen branch away, before wrapping the trembling pup inside her ranger jacket. The tiny creature shivered for only a moment before settling quietly against her chest, releasing a slow breath that sounded almost like relief. She smiled to herself. "Looks like you're coming home with me." As she carried him back toward her pickup truck, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that someone was watching from deep inside the trees. Every few minutes she glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see another wolf emerge from the shadows. Nothing appeared. Only silent woods stretched endlessly beneath the fading light. What Emily didn't know was that she had just crossed an invisible line hidden for centuries. Miles beyond the mountains, inside a kingdom untouched by maps or satellites, ancient bells suddenly echoed through a palace carved from black stone. Warriors stopped where they stood. Advisors fell silent. A towering throne remained empty beneath a silver banner marked with the crest of the Alpha bloodline. The young heir had vanished. Across forests, rivers, and forgotten valleys, thousands began searching before the moon could fully rise. None of them imagined that the future of their kingdom was already asleep inside the passenger seat of an old ranger's truck, wrapped safely in a faded green jacket beside a woman who believed she had rescued nothing more than a lonely little wolf. Emily's cabin sat nearly 20 miles from the nearest town, tucked beside a narrow stream where the water stayed clear even after heavy rain. It was simple, weathered by long winters and bright summers, with a stone fireplace that always seemed to make the place feel warmer than it really was. As soon as she stepped inside, the little wolf stirred beneath her jacket, lifting his tiny head just enough to study every corner of the room. His bright blue eyes moved with surprising focus, almost as if he were memorizing the unfamiliar surroundings instead of reacting like a frightened wild animal. Emily gently placed him on a thick wool blanket beside the fireplace and disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later she returned carrying warm water, clean towels, and supplies from the emergency wildlife kit she kept for injured animals. She carefully examined his paw, relieved to discover that it had only been bruised beneath the fallen branch. There were no deep cuts, no broken bones, only a little swelling that would likely heal after several days of rest. The tiny wolf remained perfectly still while she wrapped the paw with soft medical gauze. Most wild pups would have struggled, whimpered, or tried to escape. This one simply watched her with calm patience. Every now and then he tilted his head slightly, almost appearing curious about every movement she made. Emily laughed quietly to herself. You are either the bravest little wolf I have ever met, or the strangest. The pup responded by blinking once before letting out a tiny sound that resembled a soft sigh more than a howl. Later that evening she warmed a bottle of goat's milk and poured a small amount into a shallow dish. The little wolf approached carefully, sniffed it once, then looked directly at Emily before taking his first drink. Good choice, she smiled. You definitely needed that. Outside, the wind grew stronger, pushing tree branches gently against the cabin roof while the first stars slowly appeared across the darkening Montana sky. Everything should have felt peaceful. Yet an unusual feeling lingered in the air. More than once Emily caught herself glancing toward the windows without knowing why. The forest seemed unusually quiet. No owls called. No coyotes answered from distant hills. Even the stream outside sounded softer than usual, as though the entire wilderness were holding its breath. The little wolf suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched toward the northern mountains. He slowly walked to the front window and stared into the darkness without making a sound. Emily followed his gaze but saw nothing except endless rows of pine trees swaying beneath the moonlight. Do you miss your family? She asked gently. The pup lowered his eyes for only a moment before looking back into the forest again. There was something unexpectedly sad in that expression, something that made Emily's heart ache despite reminding herself that she was only imagining human emotions in a wild animal. She reached down and gently scratched behind his ears. Instead of pulling away, the little wolf leaned against her hand with complete trust. Within seconds he curled beside the fireplace, resting his head across her boot before drifting peacefully to sleep. Emily smiled as she covered him with another blanket. You can stay until you are strong enough to go home, she whispered. Far beyond the mountains, hidden where no ordinary traveler could ever find it, torches illuminated enormous stone walls as messengers raced through ancient halls carrying the same desperate report. Patrols had searched every valley. Scouts had crossed rivers and climbed frozen cliffs. Still there was no sign of the missing young heir. Standing beneath towering silver pillars, Commander Rowan Hayes listened in complete silence before turning toward the massive throne that remained occupied by a single figure, whose quiet presence seemed heavier than the mountain itself. King Aldrich Blackthorn did not speak. He simply looked toward the northern horizon through the palace balcony, as though he could sense something no one else could. Finally, without raising his voice, he gave one calm command. Find my son before the next full moon. Across the kingdom, thousands immediately answered, unaware that destiny had already placed the missing prince exactly where he needed to be. The following morning arrived wrapped in a blanket of golden sunlight that spilled gently through the tall pine trees surrounding the cabin. Emily woke before dawn, as she always did, expecting to hear the usual sounds of birds greeting the new day. Instead, she noticed something unusual. Every bird perched near the cabin remained perfectly still. A family of deer stood quietly at the edge of the tree line, their ears pointed toward the porch, yet none of them appeared frightened. It was almost as though the forest itself had gathered for a silent meeting. Emily stepped outside carrying a steaming mug of coffee, only to discover the little wolf sitting patiently on the wooden porch, watching the sunrise with remarkable composure. Most young animals would have been chasing butterflies or exploring every inch of the yard. He simply sat there, calm and dignified, as if he had witnessed hundreds of mornings before this one. You are definitely different, Emily said with a smile. The tiny wolf glanced back at her, then slowly walked down the porch steps before stopping beside a patch of wildflowers. A butterfly landed briefly on his nose, yet he remained completely motionless until it flew away again. Emily laughed softly and reached for her camera. She snapped a few pictures, hoping to document his recovery before eventually releasing him back into the wilderness. Throughout the morning she completed chores around the property while the little wolf followed only a few steps behind. Whenever she carried firewood, he trotted faithfully beside her. When she refilled the bird feeders, he watched every movement with quiet fascination. At one point she accidentally dropped her work gloves near the shed. Before she even noticed, The tiny wolf picked one up gently and carried it back to her, placing it neatly at her feet. Emily blinked in surprise. "Well, thank you." The pup wagged his tail once before sitting proudly, almost appearing pleased with himself. She had worked with wildlife for nearly 8 years, yet she had never witnessed behavior quite like this. Intelligence was common among wolves, but this felt different. Deliberate. Thoughtful. Almost human. By late afternoon they wandered toward the nearby stream where crystal-clear water flowed over smooth stones polished by countless seasons. Emily knelt beside the bank to collect a water sample for her weekly environmental report, while the little wolf explored the shoreline. Suddenly he stopped beside a flat gray rock partially buried beneath the sand. He looked toward Emily, then gently tapped the stone twice with one paw before stepping back. Curious, she walked over and lifted it. Beneath the rock rested a weathered silver pendant engraved with an unfamiliar crest shaped like a crescent moon surrounded by elegant branches. "That is strange," she murmured. "How did you know this was here?" The tiny wolf merely watched her with those extraordinary blue eyes before looking toward the distant mountains once again. Emily slipped the pendant into her jacket pocket, assuming it had probably belonged to an old hiker years ago. She never imagined it was far older than any town shown on modern maps. As evening settled across the valley, heavy clouds gathered above the peaks, painting the western sky in shades of deep purple and gold. The little wolf climbed onto a large boulder overlooking the forest. Instead of playing, he stood perfectly still with his face lifted toward the breeze. Moments later, distant howls echoed faintly across the mountains. They were too far away for ordinary ears to understand, but the tiny wolf closed his eyes as though listening to every note. He answered with only the softest whisper of a howl, so quiet that Emily almost missed it completely. Hundreds of miles away, hidden within the ancient kingdom, every experienced tracker suddenly stopped moving at exactly the same moment. Commander Rowan slowly raised his head. The sound had been impossibly faint, carried across forests and valleys by a wind no ordinary person could hear. A hopeful smile finally crossed his face. "He is alive," he whispered. Around him, seasoned warriors exchanged relieved glances before immediately changing their direction. For the first time since the young heir disappeared, they finally had something more valuable than hope. They had a trail. The next 2 days passed with an almost magical rhythm, quiet enough to make Emily believe that life had finally slowed down. Each sunrise brought a little more strength to the young wolf. The swelling in his tiny paw faded, his silver-gray coat regained its healthy shine, and the cautious little creature she had found beneath the old oak tree slowly transformed into a playful companion who seemed to fill every corner of the cabin with unexpected warmth. Emily never gave him an official name because she reminded herself every morning that he belonged in the wild, yet she often caught herself calling him Little Guy whenever he wandered too far ahead on the trails surrounding the cabin. He always turned around the moment he heard her voice, almost smiling before running back to her side. It was impossible not to become attached. On the third afternoon, Emily packed a small backpack with water, trail snacks, and her field notebook before deciding to inspect an old fire lookout trail several miles north of the cabin. The little wolf eagerly followed beside her, his injured paw now strong enough to keep pace over the rocky path. Autumn painted the mountains in brilliant shades of gold, crimson, and amber, while cool air carried the fresh scent of pine across the valley. Everything felt peaceful until the little wolf suddenly stopped walking. His ears stood upright. His bright blue eyes locked onto something hidden deep between the trees. Emily noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Instead of moving forward, he stepped directly in front of her boots, as though blocking the trail. It was the first time he had ever refused to continue walking. Emily scanned the forest carefully but saw nothing except swaying branches and scattered sunlight filtering through the tall pines. A few moments later, faint voices drifted through the trees. Human voices. She instinctively guided the little wolf behind a fallen log before listening more carefully. 3 men wearing expensive outdoor gear slowly emerged along the trail carrying cameras, backpacks, and tranquilizer equipment clearly marked with a private wildlife research logo. At first glance they appeared to be harmless researchers, but something about their behavior unsettled her. They were not observing nature. They were searching for something very specific. One of them unfolded a detailed topographic map while another pointed toward fresh paw prints in the dirt only a few yards away. The reports were accurate, one man said quietly. The rare silver pup has been seen in this area. Another nodded. Our client offered an unbelievable reward. We find the animal first, we all retire early. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She glanced toward the little wolf, who remained perfectly silent behind the fallen log. His breathing stayed calm, yet his eyes never left the stranger's. There was no panic, only careful observation. Emily slowly stood and stepped onto the trail before the men noticed the paw prints. Afternoon, she called with a friendly smile. The 3 visitors looked up in surprise. Can I help you? As a wildlife ranger, Emily's calm confidence immediately shifted the conversation. The oldest man smiled politely. We are documenting regional wolf activity. Emily nodded without changing her expression. This section of forest is temporarily closed for habitat restoration. If you continue north, you could disturb protected nesting areas. It was only a partial truth, but convincing enough. The men exchanged uncertain glances. None of them seemed interested in challenging a uniformed ranger familiar with the land. After thanking her, they folded their map and headed back toward the main trail. Emily waited until their footsteps completely disappeared before kneeling beside the little wolf. Looks like somebody out there is looking for you, she whispered. The tiny wolf gently rested his head against her hand for only a second before turning once more toward the distant mountains. High above the valley, hidden among towering cliffs, Commander Rowan stood silently on an overlook where the wind carried countless scents across the wilderness. He closed his eyes, sensing that others had entered the search. This was no longer only a rescue mission. Someone else had begun following the trail of the missing heir, and every passing hour made the race far more dangerous than anyone inside the kingdom had first imagined. That night the wind carried an unfamiliar chill across the mountains, and for the first time since bringing the little wolf home, Emily locked every door before going to bed. She could not explain why. Nothing had actually happened. The 3 strangers had left peacefully, the forest remained quiet, and the stars still stretched across the Montana sky exactly as they always had. Yet the feeling refused to disappear. It lingered somewhere deep inside her, the quiet instinct she had learned to trust after years of working alone in remote wilderness. The little wolf seemed to feel it as well. Instead of sleeping beside the fireplace, he climbed onto the rug near the front door and remained awake, listening to sounds that Emily could not hear. Every few minutes his ears twitched toward the forest, before settling again. Just before sunrise she stepped outside with a flashlight, expecting nothing more than the crisp morning air. Instead she froze. Fresh footprints surrounded the cabin. They were human, several different sizes, leading to the edge of the porch before disappearing back into the trees. No one had knocked. No one had called out. Someone had simply come close enough to watch before quietly leaving. Emily crouched to examine the tracks. They were recent, made only a few hours earlier while the ground was still damp from the evening mist. Her expression became serious. She immediately reported the unusual activity through her ranger radio, but the nearest patrol was nearly 40 miles away and promised only to increase routine surveillance over the coming days. She thanked them, although she knew help would not arrive quickly if something unexpected happened. Returning inside, she found the little wolf already waiting beside the door, looking directly at the muddy footprints she had accidentally carried onto the floor. He gently nudged her hand before walking toward the window facing the northern mountains. You know something I do not, do you? Emily asked quietly. The little wolf looked back at her with calm blue eyes before placing one paw lightly against the glass. Far beyond the forests, hidden inside the ancient kingdom, enormous maps covered a stone table surrounded by commanders, scouts, and royal advisors. Colored markers traced every river, valley, and mountain pass across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Commander Rowan stood at the center of the room listening as each patrol delivered its report. Every search party had reached the same conclusion. Someone outside the kingdom was also following the young heir. Not by accident, but with purpose. Rowan slowly placed a silver token onto one section of the map. "The scent leads here," he said, pointing toward a remote valley beyond ordinary human settlements. "He is close." A younger officer smiled with relief. "Then we can reach him before tomorrow." Rowan remained silent for several seconds. "Perhaps," he finally answered. "Unless someone else arrives first." Back at the cabin, Emily decided it was no longer safe to follow her usual routine. Instead of taking the little wolf onto open hiking trails, she spent the afternoon closer to home, repairing a broken fence near the stream while keeping a careful eye on the surrounding forest. The little wolf stayed nearby, occasionally chasing falling leaves before returning to sit beside her. Despite everything that had happened, he still carried the innocent curiosity of a young pup. Watching him made it difficult to believe that anyone would travel so far simply to find him. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, a faint sound drifted across the valley. It was not loud enough to resemble a howl, nor sharp enough to be mistaken for the call of any bird. It was a single clear note, carried gently by the evening breeze. The little wolf immediately lifted his head. His eyes widened with unmistakable recognition. For the first time since Emily had found him, his tail began to wag before he sprinted several yards toward the tree line and stopped, looking back at her as though inviting her to follow. Hidden among the distant pines, unseen by human eyes, a cloaked figure watched the cabin from the fading light. Commander Rowan had finally found the place where the future of an ancient kingdom had been quietly waiting all along. Emily hesitated for only a moment before following the little wolf toward the edge of the forest. The evening air had turned cool, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and the promise of approaching rain. Long shadows stretched between the towering trees as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. The little wolf stopped several yards ahead, his bright blue eyes fixed on a narrow clearing where silver light filtered through the branches. Emily instinctively slowed her pace. Every lesson she had learned as a wildlife ranger told her to stay alert whenever the forest became this quiet. Yet nothing about the silence felt threatening. It felt expectant, as though nature itself were waiting for something important to happen. A tall figure slowly stepped out from behind an ancient cedar tree. He wore a dark cloak that blended naturally with the fading light, and, although his appearance was unfamiliar, there was nothing aggressive in his posture. His hands remained visible at his sides, and his expression carried calm dignity rather than suspicion. The little wolf immediately ran toward him with unmistakable joy before stopping only a few feet away, his tail wagging gently. Emily watched in surprise as the stranger lowered himself onto one knee instead of reaching for the young wolf. He bowed his head respectfully. "Your Highness," he said softly. The words drifted through the clearing so naturally that for a moment Emily wondered if she had misheard them. The little wolf responded by stepping closer and gently touching the man's shoulder with one tiny paw. The stranger smiled with visible relief before raising his eyes toward Emily. "Miss Emily Carter," he said with quiet gratitude. "I have searched many days hoping to meet the person who protected him." Emily stared in confusion. "Protected who?" she asked. The man looked toward the little wolf with unmistakable affection. "Prince Kael, heir to the Blackthorn bloodline and the future Alpha King." Emily blinked several times, almost expecting him to laugh and admit it was some elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, the stranger calmly reached inside his cloak and removed a polished silver medallion engraved with the exact same crescent moon emblem she had discovered beneath the stone beside the stream. Her hand instinctively moved to the pendant resting safely inside her jacket pocket. The symbols were identical. Every detail matched perfectly. The stranger noticed her expression and gave a small nod. "You found one of our royal markers." Emily slowly removed the pendant and held it in her palm. "This belongs to you." "It belongs to the royal family," he answered. "Only those sworn to protect the heir carry that crest." Emily looked from the pendant to the little wolf and back again. Her mind searched desperately for a logical explanation. Hidden communities. Ancient traditions. private wildlife preserves. Anything that made more sense than what she was hearing. You are telling me this little wolf is a prince? The stranger smiled kindly. Whether he walks on 4 legs or one is not what defines him. His heart carries the future of an entire kingdom. Before Emily could ask another question, the little wolf walked back to her side and gently leaned against her leg exactly as he had done every evening since arriving at the cabin. The gesture seemed to surprise the stranger more than it surprised Emily. For several quiet seconds he simply watched the young prince resting comfortably beside the woman who had rescued him. He trusts you completely, the man whispered, almost to himself. That is a gift very few receive. Emily knelt and gently stroked the little wolf behind his ears. His name is Kael? She asked softly. The stranger nodded. Prince Kael Blackthorn. Emily smiled warmly at the tiny wolf. Well, Kael, I guess you have been keeping a pretty big secret. Kael looked up at her with the same calm blue eyes that had first met hers beneath the old oak tree, and for the first time since this extraordinary journey began, Emily realized that every impossible moment, every strange coincidence, and every quiet instinct had been leading to this single truth. The little wolf she had rescued was never simply lost. He had been waiting for the right person to find him. Commander Rowan remained on one knee, allowing the silence to settle naturally between them. The fading light painted the forest in soft shades of silver and blue while a gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead. Emily looked down at Kael, who still rested comfortably beside her, as though nothing extraordinary had been revealed. She smiled in disbelief. If he is truly a prince, why would he ever be alone out here? Rowan slowly rose to his feet, his expression thoughtful rather than guarded. Because even the strongest kingdoms cannot prevent every unexpected turn of fate, he answered. A sudden storm separated the royal escort from the young heir several days ago. We searched every valley, every mountain pass, and every hidden trail. We feared he would be frightened and alone. Rowan's eyes softened as he watched Kael gently brush against Emily's leg. Instead, he found someone who chose compassion without expecting anything in return. Emily glanced toward the distant mountains. I only did what anyone should have done. Rowan gave a quiet smile. That is exactly what makes it extraordinary. Before she could respond, a cool breeze swept through the clearing. The surrounding trees began to sway, not from the strength of the wind but as though responding to a silent rhythm. Birds gathered along nearby branches without making a sound. A family of deer stepped cautiously into the edge of the clearing, standing peacefully instead of retreating into the woods. Emily looked around in amazement. What is happening? Rowan lowered his head respectfully. They feel his father approaching. Moments later, a deep golden light appeared beyond the towering pines. It was not bright enough to hurt the eyes, only warm enough to make the entire forest seem alive. From between the ancient trees emerged a tall man dressed in dark clothing trimmed with silver embroidery that reflected the evening light like moonlit water. His presence carried quiet confidence rather than intimidation. Every movement was calm, measured, and dignified. Before Emily even realized what was happening, Rowan bowed deeply. Hidden among the trees, dozens of cloaked guardians stepped into view and lowered their heads in perfect silence. The deer remained peacefully where they stood. Birds did not fly away. Even the breeze seemed to pause. The little wolf looked toward the newcomer, let out a joyful bark, and raced across the clearing. The man knelt immediately, opening his arms with unmistakable affection. Kael happily pressed against him, his tail wagging with excitement, as though greeting someone he had missed every day since they were separated. Emily watched quietly, her heart warming at the simple reunion. The man gently stroked Kael's silver fur before lifting his gaze toward her. His eyes reflected kindness, wisdom, and quiet gratitude earned through countless years of responsibility. He walked forward slowly, making certain every step communicated respect. Emily instinctively stood, uncertain whether she should speak first. She did not have the chance. Standing only a few feet away, the man placed one hand across his heart and bowed his head. Emily Carter, he said in a calm voice that carried remarkable warmth. I am Aldrich Blackthorn. More importantly, I am a grateful father. Emily blinked in surprise. Of all the reactions she had imagined after learning the truth, this had never crossed her mind. There was no demand. No accusation. No expectation. Only sincere appreciation. King Aldrich looked down at Kael before returning his attention to Emily. You sheltered my son when you believed he was only a helpless creature in need of kindness. You protected him without knowing his name, his family, or his future. That choice cannot be measured by any treasure or title. Emily felt unexpectedly emotional. I never expected anything in return, she replied softly. Aldrich smiled gently. That is why your kindness will never be forgotten. In every kingdom, there are those who serve because they must. Very few choose to serve simply because it is the right thing to do. You reminded my son what goodness looks like long before he learns what leadership truly means. As twilight settled over the valley, Emily realized she was no longer standing between two different worlds. She had quietly become the bridge connecting them, simply because she had listened to a tiny cry in the forest when everyone else would have kept walking. The forest remained peaceful long after the first meeting should have ended. Instead of rushing Prince Kael away, King Aldrich chose to walk beside Emily through the familiar trails she had crossed countless times, quietly observing the place that had protected his son. The towering pines, the gentle stream, and the small weathered cabin all seemed ordinary by human standards, yet the Alpha King looked upon each detail with genuine respect. A palace is only stone without kindness inside it, he said softly. For several days, this simple cabin became more valuable than any throne I possess. Emily smiled awkwardly. Compliments had never made her comfortable. It was just a place to stay while he recovered. Aldrich looked down at Kael, who happily trotted between them, occasionally nudging Emily's hand before running back to his father. To you it was temporary, the king replied. To him, it became the first lesson that true strength can wear an ordinary face. As they reached the stream where Emily had discovered the silver pendant, Rowan paused and carefully examined the smooth stones along the water's edge. He nodded quietly before turning toward Aldrich. Everything happened exactly where the old guardians predicted. Emily raised an eyebrow. Predicted? Rowan smiled. For generations there has been a story that when the future ruler is truly ready to understand his people, destiny will place him in the care of someone who expects nothing from him. Emily laughed gently. That sounds like one of those old legends tourists ask me about. Most legends begin because someone witnessed the truth. Aldrich answered with a warm smile. Before Emily could respond, Kael wandered toward the center of the stream, stopping beside a large flat stone where crystal-clear water reflected the evening sky. He looked back at both of them, letting out a cheerful bark before placing one tiny paw on the smooth rock. Almost immediately, dozens of fish quietly gathered beneath the surface. Colorful birds settled along nearby branches. Even a pair of foxes appeared from the trees, watching peacefully from a respectful distance. Emily stared in amazement. During all her years working in the wilderness, she had never seen so many different animals gathered together with such complete calm. None appeared frightened. None competed for space. They simply shared the quiet moment as though responding to an invisible invitation. Aldrich watched the scene with gentle pride. Nature recognizes those who protect balance rather than control it, he explained. One day Kael must earn that trust every single day. Emily looked at the little wolf, suddenly realizing that the curious behavior she had noticed from the very beginning had never been unusual at all. The birds gathering outside her cabin. The deer refusing to run away. The silence that settled over the forest whenever Kael listened to the wind. Every moment had been quietly preparing her to understand who he truly was. Rowan then stepped forward carrying a small wooden box carved from dark cedar. Opening it carefully, he revealed a delicate silver compass unlike any Emily had ever seen. Instead of pointing north, its polished needle slowly turned until it faced Kael before settling into place. Rowan offered the box respectfully. This was crafted by our finest artisans many years ago. It always points toward the heart of the royal bloodline, but today it also serves another purpose. Emily looked at him with quiet confusion. Aldrich gently closed the box and placed it into her hands. "Accept this not as payment," he said. "Kindness should never be purchased. Accept it as a reminder that our kingdom will always know the way back to the friend who gave its future hope when hope seemed lost." Emily held the small compass carefully, feeling unexpectedly moved. She realized she had never asked for recognition, never expected gratitude, and certainly never imagined becoming part of a story hidden beyond every map she had ever studied. Yet as the last golden light disappeared behind the mountains, she understood that some journeys begin not with extraordinary courage, but with the simple decision to stop, listen, and answer a frightened cry that everyone else might have ignored. Several days later, the morning sun rose gently over the Montana mountains, filling the valley with the same peaceful light that had greeted Emily every day for years. At first glance, nothing seemed different. The stream still whispered over smooth stones. The pine trees still swayed with the mountain breeze. Her small cabin still stood quietly beside the forest as though it had never witnessed anything extraordinary. Yet Emily knew that everything had changed. The silver compass rested on a wooden shelf above the fireplace, its polished needle moving with quiet purpose whenever she passed by. She never tried to explain it. Some mysteries deserved respect instead of answers. Life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Emily resumed her patrols, greeted hikers with the same friendly smile, and continued rescuing injured wildlife whenever she found it. But from time to time, she noticed small reminders that she was no longer entirely alone. A hawk would circle silently overhead before disappearing beyond the mountains. A family of deer would calmly watch from the edge of a meadow without the slightest hint of fear. Once, while repairing a trail marker after a summer storm, she found a single silver feather resting perfectly on the path, untouched by the wind. She smiled without picking it up because somehow she already understood that it was not a coincidence. One cool autumn evening, almost exactly 1 year after she had discovered the frightened little wolf beneath the old oak tree, Emily stepped onto her porch carrying a warm cup of tea. The forest was unusually quiet again, but this time the silence felt welcoming instead of uncertain. As the first stars appeared overhead, a familiar howl drifted softly across the valley. It was stronger now, filled with confidence instead of uncertainty. Emily smiled toward the distant mountains. "You are doing well," she whispered into the evening air. Hundreds of miles away, upon a balcony overlooking an ancient kingdom hidden from ordinary eyes, a young silver wolf stood beside King Kael Blackthorn. Prince Kael had grown stronger with every passing season, yet when the wind carried the scent of pine from distant forests, he always paused for a quiet moment before looking toward the human world. Aldrich noticed the familiar expression and smiled. "You still think about her?" Kael gently nodded before lifting his eyes toward the stars. "Because she taught me something every future king must remember," he answered. "Power may earn obedience, but kindness earns trust." Aldrich rested a proud hand upon his son's shoulder. "Then you learned the lesson destiny wanted you to find." Far below the palace, Commander Rowan watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. The search that had once consumed an entire kingdom had ended not with conquest or glory, but with gratitude. It had become a story that every young guardian would one day hear, reminding them that greatness often arrives wearing ordinary clothes and asking for nothing in return. Back in Montana, Emily looked once more toward the endless line of mountains before returning inside her warm cabin. She never spoke publicly about the remarkable visitors she had met, and few would have believed her if she had tried. She simply carried the memory in her heart, understanding that some of life's greatest rewards were not meant to be displayed, only remembered. The little cry she had followed through the trees had lasted only a few seconds, yet its echo would remain for a lifetime. In the end, no crown, no title, and no hidden kingdom defined the most important moment of the story. Everything began because one ordinary woman chose compassion before curiosity, kindness before caution, and hope before doubt. Sometimes the world changes not because someone searches for destiny, but because destiny quietly waits for the first person willing to stop and care. And perhaps that is the greatest kind of strength anyone can ever leave behind.